Satellite navigation is the invisible infrastructure powering everything from financial systems to precision warfare and everyday smartphones. For a decade, that backbone has been dominated by the US-developed GPS. But now countries are racing to build their own alternatives. From China's ambitious BeiDou constellation to India's struggling Navik, the competition for space-based navigation has never been more heated. We'll explore the emerging alternatives to GPS and what that means for Taiwan's security and communications. We are joined from Delhi by Ankit Bhateja, founder of Jovian Aerospace. Thank you so much for being on the program. Firstly, I'd like to start by take you back in time to understand how your early experiences have led you to this point at Jovian Aerospace.
So the journey started way back in 2014 while I was still in college. We were building small education modules targeting space education. So that was basically CanSat. CanSat is basically a small soda can in which you fit different electronics, which is commercially off-the-shelf available electronic components. And then you try to collect different data sets just like a satellite does. So this used to mimic exact satellite mission. And that is where our journey started, where we were targeting this kind of education module to students, hobbyists, and researchers across different states of India. And that was like almost for 4 years, this journey continued. And we also launched a student satellite mission. And that's where we saw that there is a lot of potential in this sector. And finally, in 2019, we started Jovian Aerospace.
Now, I understand Jovian Aerospace has developed advanced RF satellite tracking systems. Can you walk us through the core technologies involved?
Absolutely. So conventionally, when we talk about Earth observation, which means that the satellites that are used to track different things happening on the Earth's surface, conventionally, the technologies used in that case is camera. So basically, you put a camera on the satellite and then it collects a lot of data. But the problem is that the optical systems, which is the camera, is used to detect the changes that are happening on the Earth's surface, wherein you take different images over a period of time, and then you understand what are the changes that has occurred over a period of time on that particular piece of land. Whereas when we talk about conflicts, when we talk about geopolitical shifts that are happening across the globe, what is happening is that things are changing very quickly. And when you want to monitor the live action, it is not something that you can detect just with the help of images. For example, if the aircraft is moving, if a ship is moving, if military convoy is moving, all these are something you cannot just collect the images and then tell what is happening. So what is required here is some different kind of technology, and that is what we are building. So what we are doing is collecting radio frequency. So everything and anything which is developed by human these days, including all the moving assets, it emits some kind of radio waves. So we collect that radio frequency in order to provide the information on the movements of the asset. And that is something which is very critical given the current geopolitical shift scenario and the conflicts that are happening across the globe. So that is something we are building, and the constellation is soon getting deployed to provide this kind of critical data for different industries across the globe.
And is that being used anywhere at the moment? Has that been developed commercially anywhere at the moment, or are any governments using that kind of technology right now for their services?
Yes. So this has been predominantly a US occupied territory in terms of this kind of technology. So we have a couple of US companies who had started developing this kind of technology a couple of years back, like 6 to 7 years back. And now what we have seen in different conflicts and due to different events that are happening across the globe, the demand of this kind of data is increasing. And then at the same time, what is happening in the South China Sea and what is happening in the global South, it is creating a lot of demand for such kind of data sets. And that is where we are coming in to address that demand.
The bigger countries that are trying to create and launch their own sovereign navigation systems and China's BeiDou seems to have made inroads, particularly in this part of the world. Can you tell us how that system compares to the US's GPS system?
Yes. So this navigation race had started with Russia and US building their own navigation satellites, but then China came in with their own navigation constellation, which is BeiDou. So now, if we talk about the current state, BeiDou is a bit more superior as compared to GPS. So how that happened is, first is the scale of constellation. BeiDou sort of has more satellite as compared to any other given navigation satellite constellation. And second is the ground referencing stations which are there. So what happens is that when you launch such kind of satellite, you need to have some kind of system which is referencing the position and timing on ground as well. So China sort of deployed these ground referencing systems, in masses, and there is a 10x sort of size if we talk about the number of ground referencing stations they have deployed. And third thing is that the soft power which China has shown, particularly in Global South Belt and Road Initiative. So they are pushing heavily on the infrastructure by side implementing this BeiDou-based systems around these infrastructure projects. So that is where using such kind of things, this penetration of BeiDou has, increased over last few years, and countries are now worrying like how and what kind of, decisions they need to make in order to make sure their own systems are up and are at par with the Chinese BeiDou constellation.
So given that China is emerging as quite a force when it comes to its navigation system, how concerned should Taiwan be in particular, given the geopolitical tensions between the two sides?
From Taiwan's point of view, because we also have been working with a lot of Taiwanese partners, and what we see here is that on one side we have US, where GPS was, mostly utilized by US allies, whereas now when it is coming to China, we can see what is happening currently, which is in the Iran war, what is happening. So using the soft power, China has been penetrating these technologies. And considering the global south, there has been a lot of deep penetration of such technologies over the countries that are in the global south. So for Taiwan, the biggest concern would be like how to bring some sort of countermeasures to have such kind of technology in place, so that there is not too much dependence on BeiDou. And still there is a midway path which Taiwan can adapt in order to make sure that if there is some kind of requirement in future for its own sovereign infrastructure, there is not too much dependency on the existing systems.
But what does that mean for Taiwan's security in particular if it comes to armed conflict or even kinetic warfare? If China has control over this satellite navigation system that is being widely used and can be used against Taiwan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the biggest example for this would be from India itself. So when in India-Pakistan conflict was there, I'm talking about the Kargil war in 90s. So what had happened is US and India were not in good terms. So what had happened that India wanted to strike Pakistani infrastructure, and that required access to the mill-grade GPS, which is more of much accurate signals you get, and then you can do the military strikes. But US had denied access to India to have, for the utilization of those signals. And that is where the biggest challenge came, that if the access to such things is denied, then during a conflict stage, the country who is sort of looking at these technologies or is at dependency on these technologies faces a lot of losses, because ultimately you were dependent on somebody else's technology, and while the conflict started, you did not have enough infrastructure available with yourself in order to conduct these strikes. And similar situation I see, like if something happens, Taiwan needs to be ready with alternate technologies. in order to make sure that there is not too much dependency on the third party infrastructure, particularly Chinese infrastructure. And there has been a lot of work going on globally. And I think on the same terms, Taiwanese ecosystem can take lessons from and start doing the developments. It could be alternate to GPS, which is where strong ground station infrastructure or ground reference based infrastructure can be established. And now there has been new technologies coming in where you have sort of M-code military signals, which are anti-jam or jamming proof, because jamming also plays an important role in such conflicts. So using these things, and then 5G infrastructure is already, I think, is in place in Taiwan very well. So leveraging the existing infrastructure and by leveraging it, developing some technologies which are more sort of resilient to such tactics or such jamming incidents. That will, I think, prove much more advantageous when such kind of conflict situation arises in the future.
And speaking of conflict situations, that is happening right now. Iran has used Chinese satellite imagery, including high-resolution systems like the TEE-01B, to monitor and target U.S. military bases. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. is restricting its satellite imagery, so that can't be used in other certain situations. Can you explain what's happening there? And is this a case of one navigation system going against another navigation system?
So here, I think multiple technologies are playing. So on one hand, we have Earth observation, where you are doing the surveillance using the existing satellites. And then you have the navigation satellites. So what US had done is when the conflict started, US restricted its own players from sharing the images to third party. For example, predominantly this Earth observation sector or intelligence surveillance sector is dominant by the US players, which is companies like Maxar, Planet Labs. So what US had done is restricted the sharing of the images by these companies to third party. So now what is happening is that on one hand, we have US restricting the access of these images, where they wanted that the adversary is not sort of taking advantage of real-time imagery, which is coming from its own satellites. But then on the contrary, China was providing, there have been like multiple reports that China had been providing these images to Iran in order to make sure that Iran has, good list of targets where they can hit. So this is where most of the intelligence was reaching Iran. So now if we see this scenario, on one hand, restriction is there, and on the other hand, China is sort of open sourcing and, projecting itself as a space power. So from the future point of view, this is certainly going to give advantage to China, because China is new to space race when it comes to commercial companies, whereas US already had a lot of space companies which are supplying imagery and data to multiple countries across the globe. So this will now sort of bring a competition to the commercial market, where Chinese companies will see a much larger market available to them. And that is sort of concerning to a lot of countries, including India as well, because India is putting a lot of emphasis on its own private sector as well. So it's more about capturing the global, space economy as much as you can by giving in this kind of technologies to the different countries, as many countries as possible. So yes, that is happening currently, and China is pushing its own private players to go to the global stage and start providing these services to as many conflicts or as many countries as they can.
And another growing threat or growing techniques or sophistication, elements of sophistication, is in the jamming and spoofing of those signals. What do you think the U.S. has learned from this Iran experience, and what is being developed now in the U.S. to counter that?
So I think jamming is like a issue standing from last couple of years now, and we saw instances of it in Russia-Ukraine war. And then now it has continued to Strait of Hormuz, where we are seeing a lot of jamming reports coming in from Iran side as well. So what is happening here is that it certainly impacts global supply chains because when jamming is there, you cannot fly aircrafts over that area. And when jamming is there, shipping also faces a lot of challenges. And there are a lot of other problems that emerge when there is a jamming incident, being reported in a particular area. So what is happening is all these GPS chips that you have in your cell phone or in your navigation devices, these chips basically get the signals from the navigation satellites. And when there is some kind of jamming happening in the nearby area, you do not know where exactly is your location because the chip which is meant to tell your location, it is unable to process the information. So that is what is resulting in a lot of challenges across the globe. And what is happening now is a lot of organizations, a lot of companies are coming up with counter jamming technologies. And one of this is jamming proof receivers. So whatever receiver that you have in your cell phone or in the navigation devices, these are currently prone to jamming. And that is because when such receivers were being developed, it was not thought of that something like this will happen on a mass scale and it would impact the global economies at this big of a scale. So now, considering all this, these receivers are being developed. Second is that alternate technologies, particularly like inertial navigation, which used to be there in the early days, but now there is again shift back to that technology where you use inertial mechanisms to sort of understand your position or do the navigation. And then there are receivers being developed which can sort of get very low powered signal. And from there itself, you can get, a very much of an accurate location. And then on the other hand, US is deploying another phase of GPS satellites, which is GPS-3. So GPS-3 is basically new set of satellites which are much more stronger in terms of signal power. And when the signal power is more, the receivers on ground would be able to sort of receive much more accurate data and will be able to process that information much more faster. So that is what which US has been doing. And then there are private companies that are targeting its own PNT constellations. So we had governments launching navigation satellites, and now we have private players launching their own constellations. So that is where we are seeing that a lot of competition is emerging, but at the same time, new innovative technologies are coming, which are sort of jamming proof, and we will see this impact coming on ground in upcoming 2 to 3 years.
And going back to your experience with Jovian, particularly with the partnerships in Taiwan, can you tell us what it is that you're looking at and what you think, or what Taiwan is trying to develop in this space?
So from our point of view, what we have seen is because Taiwan, we all of us know that is known for its great semiconductor ecosystem, and there has been a lot of developments around these semiconductors, which are high throughput and which are great in terms of the technologies we are building. So that is where we are seeing a lot of synergy with the Taiwanese partners. And second thing is the miniaturization because when we are launching the satellites, conventional satellites used to be very big, just like a size of a refrigerator. But now the satellite size is decreasing, and it has now come more towards like a shoebox. So that is the size of satellite you will see, which are being built by the commercial companies. So that is where we are seeing that miniaturization is important for us from the technology point of view, what we are developing. And that is where we are finding a lot of great synergies with our Taiwanese partners. And at the same time, we are seeing that a lot of space companies are emerging out of Taiwan ecosystem as well. And there has been a lot of government support, organizations like Science and Technology Council, ITRI, TASA, which is Taiwanese Space Agency. these organizations are supporting the industry to grow. And in last 3-4 years itself, we have seen more than 10 companies coming out of Taiwan, and most of these companies have built their satellites and launched it on SpaceX as well. So that's what we see, and things are looking good from the future point of view for Taiwan, particularly coming to the space sector.